Serious. What's the worst wedding you've ever been to? So, last summer, I found myself dressed in a tux that was way too tight around the collar, standing as a groomsman at my childhood buddy's wedding. Now, this wasn't your typical low-key wedding with a handful of close friends and family. Oh no, this thing was a circus. First of all, the bridal party was enormous. 10 groomsmen, 10 bridesmaids. Who needs that many people? I remember thinking, how the hell are we supposed to coordinate this many grown adults, let alone the fact that most of them had kids tagging along? I've seen less chaotic kindergarten classes, and at least those kids don't come with strollers and temper tantrums. The whole weekend was like trying to herd cats. But these weren't just any cats. They were stressed out adults with kids running around, and everyone had their own agenda. You'd think the wedding planner would have had some kind of strategy, maybe like a whistle or a cattle prod. But she seemed just as lost as the rest of us. All I remember was that we kept getting these vague instructions like, oh, meet at the church at 2, or make sure the groomsmen have their boutonnieres. No specifics, no clear leadership. We all kind of bumbled through it, hoping someone else had figured out what to do. The rehearsal dinner was the first glimpse I had that this was going to be way messier than anticipated. We were all packed into this small banquet room at some Italian restaurant that smelled like garlic bread and disappointment. The bride's mother was already on her second glass of wine by the time we sat down, and you could tell by the look on her face that she wasn't exactly thrilled with how things were shaping up. Meanwhile, the kids, so many damn kids, were running laps around the tables like it was recess. I don't know who thought it was a good idea to let kids under 5 attend a rehearsal dinner, but I'm pretty sure at least 2 of them were fueled by soda and pure chaos. At one point, I looked over at the groom, my buddy Todd, and he just gave me this defeated shrug like, well, this is my life now. Now let me be clear, I love Todd. We've been best friends since we were kids, and I was genuinely happy, but he was not a guy built for this kind of situation. He's the kind of guy who still wears cargo shorts unironically, you know? He doesn't do well with crowds, let alone orchestrating a whole wedding party that looked like it was plucked from some reality show where everyone's competing for who can be the most stressed out. And his bride, Emily, she was sweet, but she had that look in her eye that said she was one step away from completely losing her mind. I think she wanted this whole Pinterest perfect wedding, but the reality was, well, it was far from that. So anyway, the day of the wedding rolls around, and I wake up already sweating. I'm not kidding. It was one of those blistering middle-of-summer days where the heat just hits you like a wall the moment you step outside. And of course, the church they picked for the ceremony? No air conditioning. It was one of those old, grandiose churches with stained glass windows and heavy wooden pews that creaked every time you shifted your weight. Beautiful, sure, but practical? Not even close. We were all sweating bullets before we even got inside. The bridal party starts trickling in, kids in tow, all of them already looking overheated and miserable. The groomsmen, myself included, were dressed in these rented tuxes that seemed specifically designed to trap heat. Todd was pacing around, clearly nervous, and I don't blame him. Emily's family was huge, and I could see them filling up the pews like an army ready to march. The tension was palpable. Meanwhile, the kids are already causing a scene, tugging on their mini-suits and dresses, whining about being too hot or too bored. I swear, one of them tried to stick a fruit snack to the stained glass window. It was pandemonium. Now, the ceremony itself was supposed to be simple. You know, your standard vows, a couple of hymns, maybe some awkward laughs during the exchange of rings. But then, as the minister starts his homily, the whole tone of the day takes a sharp left turn. This guy, out of nowhere, decides to bring up Roe v. Wade. I'm sitting there, in this furnace of a church, my collar sticking to the back of my neck, and I can see the entire room collectively tense up. I mean, the decision had literally just come down the day before, and this guy is talking about it at a wedding. You could hear a pin drop. People were squirming in their seats, not just because of the subject matter, but because of the heat. It was so stifling in there, I half expected someone to pass out. The longer he talked, the more I could feel the energy in the room shift. Guests were glancing at each other, silently asking, is this really happening? Todd's face was priceless. He was standing up there, stone-faced, trying to keep it together, but I could see in his eyes that he was just as uncomfortable as the rest of us. Emily looked like she might explode at any second, her smile frozen in place while the minister droned on. It was like watching someone slowly realize their dream wedding was becoming a disaster, but they were powerless to stop it. The moment the homily ended, there was this collective exhale, like everyone had been holding their breath for way too long. The rest of the ceremony went by in a blur. Vows, rings, kiss, and finally, mercifully, the recessional. As we walked down the aisle, I could feel the sweat trickling down my back, and all I could think was, thank God that's over. But little did I know, the chaos was only just beginning. After the whole political homily debacle, I thought, well, it can't get much worse, right? Oh, how wrong I was. First off, nobody had water. I don't know if it was an oversight or just plain bad planning, but there wasn't a single bottle of water in sight. I guess someone figured since we were in a church, we'd all magically stay hydrated. But no, it was midsummer, the sun was beating down, and we were all dehydrated as hell. There wasn't even time to stop at a gas station beforehand. What with the chaos of trying to wrangle everyone just to get to the ceremony on time. So, there we were, standing in our sweat-soaked tuxes and fancy dresses, dying of thirst. I mean, I've seen desert survival shows where the people looked more comfortable than we did. And just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Todd, being the overly friendly, people-pleasing guy he is, decides he's going to personally greet every single guest. Now let me tell you, this wedding wasn't a small, intimate affair. There were at least 180 guests packed into that church, and Todd was determined to shake every hand, give every hug, and have a little conversation with each person like it was a backyard barbecue. Meanwhile, the rest of us groomsmen are standing there like human statues, sweat rolling down our backs, watching this whole spectacle drag on. He'd hug one person, say something like, "Thanks for coming, Aunt Carol. Means the world to me," then move on to the next. Rinse and repeat for a solid 20 minutes. I could feel the collective exasperation from the bridal party growing by the second. Emily, bless her heart, was trying to keep a smile plastered on her face the whole time, but you could see she was dying inside. I mean, I get it. Todd's a friendly guy, but there's a time and place. And after the day we'd already had, that was neither the time nor the place. Finally, when Todd finished his marathon of handshakes and awkward small talk, we were free to leave the church and head to the reception venue. But of course, we couldn't just go straight there. No, we had to take pictures first, and not just quick snaps in front of the church. Oh no, that would have been too simple. The photo spot was at a country club on the other side of a golf course. Why a golf course? I have no idea. Maybe it was some aesthetic Emily had seen in a bridal magazine or something. All I know is that getting there was a logistical nightmare. Now we had 27 people in the bridal party. That's 20 groomsmen and bridesmaids, plus 2 ring bearers, 1 flower girl, and the handful of kids that were still hanging around like a bad rash. And guess how many golf carts the country club gave us to get to the photo spot? 3. 3 golf carts. Each one seated 2 people. Do the math. That's 6 people per trip, which meant it took multiple trips back and forth across this stupid golf course just to get everyone to the photo location. It was like some twisted shuttle service where everyone was too overdressed to be anywhere near a golf course. By the time my cart finally made it over to the photo spot, the sun was blazing overhead, and I could already feel my skin starting to crisp up. We all stood there, waiting for the rest of the group to arrive, trying to find whatever shade we could. The kids, of course, were running around like they were at recess, paying no mind to the fact that the adults were all on the verge of heat stroke. I distinctly remember one of the bridesmaids' kids, a little boy who looked like he was about 5, pulling off his tiny clip-on tie and whipping it around like a lasso while his mom half-heartedly tried to get him to stand still for the pictures. Spoiler alert, he didn't. Eventually, everyone made it to the photo spot, and the photographer, a guy who looked way too energetic for someone working in that kind of heat, started arranging us like we were about to pose for a royal family portrait. The whole thing felt ridiculously formal given how sweaty and disheveled we all were. The groomsmen were lined up, the bridesmaids clutched their bouquets, and Todd and Emily were front and center, looking like a couple of wilted flowers after everything we'd been through. At this point, I was just trying to stand still without looking like I was about to pass out. I don't even know how the photographer managed to get any good shots, considering half the bridal party looked like they were about to collapse from heat exhaustion. But hey, I guess that's why they pay photographers the big bucks, to make chaos look like perfection. After what felt like an eternity of forced smiling and awkward posing, we finally wrapped up the photos. I remember Todd leaning over to me and whispering, "Man, I hope the reception goes smoother than this." I just gave him a look that said, "Dude, I wouldn't bet on it." So we pile back into the golf carts, still doing the shuttle run across the course, and make our way to the reception. Now, I figured, all right, we survived the ceremony, the sermon, the dehydration, and the photo op from hell. Surely the reception will be where we can all just relax and have some fun. Oh, how naive I was. We arrive at the reception venue. This sprawling banquet hall with high ceilings and way too many chandeliers. At first glance, it looked promising. Air conditioning, for one, which immediately felt like the best thing in the world after the furnace of a church we'd just been in. The tables were decked out with fancy centerpieces, and there was this massive three-tiered wedding cake that looked like something out of a reality TV baking competition. But of course, as with everything that day, nothing went smoothly. The moment we stepped inside, we were bombarded with last-minute setup tasks. Apparently, the decorators hadn't finished everything because the bridal party had arrived late due to the extended photo shoot. So, the groomsmen were roped into helping move chairs, adjust centerpieces, and carry boxes of decorations while the guests started arriving. There were people running around like chickens with their heads cut off, trying to get everything in place before Todd and Emily made their grand entrance. It was pure chaos, again. And as if the universe wasn't already throwing enough curveballs at us, there was still the matter of the kids. By now, they were completely unchecked, running around the banquet hall like they were on a sugar high, which they probably were, considering one of them had somehow managed to sneak a piece of cake before the reception even started. I looked over at the mother of the flower girl, and she just gave me this exasperated shrug, like she had completely given up trying to contain the madness. Honestly, I couldn't blame her. So, after what felt like an eternity in the heat, with everyone's patience wearing thin and our clothes practically sticking to us, the photographer decides that the lighting's all wrong. The sun, which had been frying us alive, was apparently too harsh for those perfect wedding shots Emily had envisioned. And now, we had to move locations. This would have been mildly annoying under normal circumstances, but after standing out there for 40 minutes in full suits with no water, it felt like a cruel joke. I remember looking over at Todd, who just looked completely drained. I was ready to mutiny, honestly, but we didn't have much choice. So we all piled back into the golf carts, once again doing the shuttle back and forth across the golf course, and headed to the reception, where, mind you, we could have taken the photos in the first place. At that point, it was like a bad sitcom that no one could turn off. Now, by the time we got back to the reception hall, people were beyond grumpy. I mean, everyone had hit their breaking point. 2 of the bridesmaids actually passed out from heat exhaustion. I kid you not. 1 second they're standing there, fanning themselves with those flimsy programs they gave us at the church, and the next they're on the ground, and people are scrambling to find water and help them up. That was it for the photos. At least, the outdoor ones. The photographer finally realized that maybe, just maybe, baking everyone under the sun for the sake of a few shots wasn't worth it. But then, as if things couldn't get more ridiculous, we're told that the new photo spot is in the middle of the damn 18th hole. I couldn't believe it. I mean, who takes wedding photos on a golf course? Sure, some couples do those dreamy sunset-lit shots by a lake or under some big oak tree, but we weren't that lucky. No, we're standing smack in the middle of the 18th hole, dodging actual golf balls and trying to look happy while golfers were giving us death stares like we were ruining their game. I half expected one of them to take a swing at us with a club out of pure frustration. After we dodged enough golf balls to make it through the photo session, we were finally allowed to head back to the reception. By this point, it's close to 5 p.m., and we were supposed to grab a quick bite to eat before dinner, which wasn't being served until 8. The plan had been to have a little downtime, maybe snack on some hors d'oeuvre, and finally get some water. But of course, nothing goes according to plan at this wedding. As soon as we get back, we're told that we have to be back in position by 5:30 to wait for the grand entrance at 6:30. Wait for what? I had no idea. All I knew was that we weren't getting any food or drinks in the meantime. So after baking in the sun, we're standing around in this big fancy hall, still starving, still dehydrated, and still in our heat-trapped tuxes, waiting for, well, nothing really. It was brutal. The kids, who had somehow found their second wind, were running around like maniacs. One of them somehow found a bell near the bar and started ringing it like he was announcing the apocalypse. Honestly, that's how it felt. I saw one of the groomsmen sneak over to the bar to beg the bartender for some water. At this point, it wasn't even about the booze. We just needed something to drink before one of us collapsed like those poor bridesmaids. Eventually, the clock ticked past 6:30, and it was finally time for the big entrance. By this point, I was beyond caring about how grand it was going to be. We were all just ready to sit down, drink, and hopefully eat something that wasn't sweat or disappointment. But like clockwork, Todd and Emily made their entrance, beaming as if none of the chaos had happened. To their credit, they looked genuinely happy, and that was a nice moment to see. The bridal party followed behind them, one by one, making our way to the head table while the guests cheered like they hadn't just been part of the weirdest, most uncomfortable day ever. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, dinner was served. And let me tell you, that food was like manna from heaven. I mean, it could have been cardboard at that point, and I still would have eaten. But no, it was actually fantastic. We're talking tender steak, perfectly cooked chicken, fresh vegetables, the works, and the water? Oh man, I think I drank more water in that hour than I had in the entire week leading up to the wedding. We all downed it like we had just crawled out of the desert. I've never seen people so grateful for basic hydration in my life. The bartenders were practically sprinting back and forth with pitchers, trying to keep up with everyone's requests. And of course, after we'd all had our fill of water, the alcohol started flowing. The open bar became the main attraction, with people lining up for everything from fancy cocktails to straight-up shots. It was like everyone collectively decided that we deserved a drink, or 5, after the day we'd had. For a brief moment, it seemed like the madness might finally be behind us. The mood lifted, people started to relax, and the music kicked in. But in true fashion for this wedding, the peace didn't last long, because of course, things were about to go off the rails once again. Around 8:30 p.m., just as people were really starting to settle into the groove of the night, music pumping, drinks flowing, and the awkwardness of earlier starting to fade, I noticed something odd. One of the groomsmen, Ian, had been hanging back, keeping to himself. At first, I didn't think much of it. Everyone handles weddings and big events differently. Maybe he was just tired from the day's chaos. But then, as the night went on, it became clear something was off. By 9 p.m., Ian was nowhere to be found, and not just in the, "Oh, he slipped off to the bathroom" kind of. He had disappeared. The best man, who was pretty sloshed by this point, came over to me, eyes wide with concern. "Hey man," he slurred, leaning in way too close. "Ian took off, into the woods behind the golf course." Now, under normal circumstances, that wouldn't have been too alarming. Maybe he just needed some fresh air. But the way the best man was looking at me, I knew there was more to the story. He dropped his voice to a whisper, stumbling a little as he said, He's got a history of self-harm. I'm really worried, man." And just like that, the whole vibe of the wedding shifted. 1 minute, we were enjoying the music and laughing over drinks, and the next, half the wedding party was stumbling around in the dark, trying to organize a search party. The woods behind the golf course weren't exactly a friendly little patch of trees either. It was dense, and the sun had long set, so we were all squinting into the blackness, trying to figure out where the hell Ian had gone. The groomsmen, myself included, were drunk and disoriented, trying to coordinate a search through the trees while still wearing our suits. It felt like some kind of surreal nightmare. We split up, flashlights in hand, because of course someone had the sense to bring out a few cell phone lights, though most of them were flickering with low battery warnings. It was the kind of scene you see in horror movies, with shadows jumping between the trees and the distant sound of the reception music faintly pulsing through the air. I remember one of the bridesmaids tripping over a tree root and spilling her drink, letting out a curse that seemed to echo way too loudly in the quiet night. We were all on edge, more drunk than sober, and not entirely sure what we were going to find out there in the dark. I think we spent a good half hour stumbling through the woods, calling out Ian's name, trying not to let our panic get the best of us. And just when I was starting to think this was going to end badly, really badly, we found him. He was sitting on the ground, leaning against a tree, staring out into the blackness like he was lost in thought. He didn't look hurt, thank God, but he was definitely not okay. A couple of the guys, a bit more sober than the rest of us, managed to talk him down, gently coaxing him back toward the reception hall. I stayed back a bit, giving them space. Ian didn't say much, and none of us knew quite what to say to him either. It was just heavy. By the time we got back to the reception, the mood had taken a nosedive. Word had spread about what happened, and even though Ian was safe, the vibe was shot. People were still dancing and drinking, but it was different now. Quieter, more subdued. The excitement that had been building throughout the night had all but fizzled out. Todd and Emily were still trying to keep things going, bless them, but there was a sort of unspoken understanding that the night wasn't going to recover. The reception limped along after that. People kept drinking, but the carefree energy from earlier was long gone. I could see Todd trying to keep up appearances, chatting with guests and forcing a smile, but I could tell he was rattled. Emily too. Weddings are supposed to be these picture-perfect days, right? At least that's the dream. But this one had taken so many weird and unexpected turns, and after Ian's situation, there was no bouncing back. By 11:30, just before last call at the bar, I decided to go up and thank the bartender. This woman had been hustling all night, keeping up with the endless requests for drinks, water, and everything in between. Despite the madness of the day, she had stayed cool and collected the whole time, and I figured she deserved some appreciation. As I walked up to the bar, I leaned in and said, "Thanks for handling all of this tonight. It's been, well, kind of crazy." She smiled at me, and I remember her looking almost relieved, like she appreciated someone noticing how hard she was working. But then she said something that stopped me in my tracks. "Oh, you guys weren't a problem at all," she said with a smirk. "It's the help that drives me crazy." She nodded toward a group of wedding guests standing behind me. I turned to see who she was talking about, and sure enough, right there in the middle of the group was the father of the bride. Now, I hadn't had much interaction with Emily's dad throughout the day, but from what I'd heard, the guy was, let's just say, not the easiest person to deal with. I guess he had been causing all kinds of trouble behind the scenes, bossing the staff around and being generally unpleasant. But hearing it from the bartender just confirmed that even the people running the show had been dealing with their own personal chaos. As I stood there, taking it all in, I realized just how much of a disaster this day had been. Between the overheated ceremony, the chaotic photo shoot, the near search and rescue operation for Ian, and now the behind-the-scenes drama with Emily's dad, it was a miracle this wedding hadn't completely fallen apart. But somehow, it had trudged along, limping its way through to the end. By midnight, the reception was winding down. Guests were filtering out, drunk and tired, while the staff started cleaning up around us. I caught Todd and Emily one last time before heading out, giving them both a hug and telling them what a beautiful wedding it had been. And you know what? Despite all the madness, they both seemed genuinely happy. Exhausted, but happy. I guess that's the thing about weddings. You can plan and plan, but at the end of the day, it's the love between two people that really matters. All the other stuff, that's just noise. But still, hands down, the worst wedding I've ever been a part of.